remembering the innocent victims of Abberfan. In communities and in schools, they stood in silence today, honouring those who died here exactly 50 years ago.
He called out to me, he said, "Madeline, she's gone," and I just sort of collapsed and I cried.
I'm live in Aberfan as Wales marks its almost unbearable loss. 144 people killed here, most of them children.
Also on the programme, a 19-year-old is tasered and arrested by counter-terrorism officers in London. The former News of the World's fake Sheikh jailed for perverting the course of justice. And man marked all the way. Putin's pride steams through the English Channel.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale in Aberfan and Alistair Stewart in the studio.
Good evening from Aberfan, where today this proud village and this proud country fell silent as they remembered Wales's darkest day. Survivors and relatives of the 116 children and 28 adults who died here were joined by Prince Charles in paying tribute. It's a tragedy that still resonates all these years on. Classes were just starting at Pantglas Junior School when it was buried in an avalanche of slurry and coal waste. Almost an entire generation of children was simply wiped out in moments. Our Wales correspondent Rupert Evelyn reports now on Aberfan remembered 50 years on.
At the graves where classmates were buried side by side, Aberfan came together once again to mourn. Silence in the valley that lost a generation. At the memorial garden where Pantglas School once stood, at the exact same time the colliery tip swept it away, a minute to remember. Cracked but not broken, the very same bell that called in the children of Pantglas School, used again, bringing today's pupils together. A flower for each of the 144 crushed and buried by an unstoppable wave of colliery waste. The children had only been in school for 15 minutes. It was the day before half-term. Heroically, desperately, people did what they could. Tragically, no one was rescued alive more than 2 hours after it happened. Marilyn Brown vividly recalls the moment she realised what had happened to her 10-year-old daughter, Jeanette.
My father said, "I'm sorry, Jeanette have gone." I said, no, I couldn't believe it then. And he said, "Madeline," and he called out to me, he said, "Madeline, she's gone." And I just sort of collapsed and I cried.
Philip Thomas was buried alive but survived. By chance, he'd been sent out of school by his teacher on an errand. Almost all of his friends died.
I do think a lot on the anniversaries of children that didn't survive. And I go up to the cemetery and I'll have a walk around the arches. And it brings little memories back of the ones that were in my class. So yeah, you know, anniversaries are hard.
The inquiry found the National Coal Board had brushed aside warnings about the stability of the tip. Repeatedly, fears were ignored by them. Visiting the village today, Prince Charles spoke for the nation.
No one should have to bear the losses you suffered, but no one could have borne those losses with greater strength or greater courage.
A dark shadow rests in the heart of this valley. But as the new generation remembers the lost generation, there is also a sense that hope is a comfort for sorrow. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Abberfan.
Well, I'm standing just outside the Memorial Garden where local people in the Prince of Wales today paid their respects. It's on the site of the junior school where so many lives were lost that day. 150,000 tonnes of slurry swept down from the hillside, engulfing this entire area. The school and its children and teachers simply didn't stand a chance. Well, Gareth Jones was 6 years old that day and he was one of the very few to escape alive, and he joins me now. Do you remember that day clearly, Gareth? How did you get out?
Yes, Mary, I do. We went into school at about 10 to 9 in the morning, and then there was all this, we were running around as young kids, little 6-year-old kids do. We'd done the registration. We all sat down at our desks. Next thing then, there was this loud banging, crashing sort of type noise. We didn't know what was going on, like a rumbling, we didn't know what was going on. And then there was, all of a sudden, there was the dust and the crackling of the timber, and the walls started to crack.
Terrifying.
It was absolutely terrifying, yes it was, and this water started to come in, and some of the children were screaming at the back of the classroom. I was one of the fortunate ones because my teacher, Mrs. Winnie Williams, she put the desk, put the table and the chair on top of the desk, and we come up to the window.
Did you realise how many people had died? Did you realise how bad it was?
Didn't really realise until a few days later that actually how many had died, because when I ran home, I went home to see my mother, and she wanted to know what I was doing home, and I said, I don't know, Mum. I said, this seems the mountain have come down on the school. She said, don't be so daft. She said, what's the matter with you? I said, I don't know, Mum. I said, and next thing, one of our neighbours had come in, and she said, Rini, which is my mother, she said, you've got to come up to school with us. She said, we've got to go, there's something wrong somewhere. And she went, and next thing my brother came in. My mother came back then, after a few minutes, basically. There was, my brother came back, and then my sister came back a bit later on.
But Gareth, how do you live after something like that? What did you have nightmares? Did you suffer trauma?
Yeah, for a few years after it, you just, you have your nightmares, and as you say, you're traumatised, yes, but we just had to get on with it. It was part and, not say part and parcel, I mustn't say that, but we had to get on with it. That was our life. We had somebody come to the door once, remember, there was a knock on the door, my mother and father was there. They went to the door, and it was like a counsellor that came, like the guidance counsellors. And I always remember my mother and father saying, we're okay as a family, thank you very much, but Mr. and Mrs. so-and-so up the street think they might need some help and guidance.
Extraordinary story. Gareth, thank you so much for talking to us
today.
Thank you. Well, the disaster has had a profound effect, of course, on the entire community here. Not just the untold grief of those who lost loved ones, but also guilt for those who had survived. Denise Morgan was 11 when her 9-year-old sister Annette died in the school. Denise told me how she, like so many here, has simply found the strength to move on after the tragedy.
Well, I can remember it as if it was yesterday, really. I can remember my mother saying quite clearly to me she didn't want to go to school that morning, and Annette was one of those children that you had to push out through the door. And she turned and waved to my mother, and off she went. My sister and I shared a bed together, shared a room together. That first night that she wasn't in that bed with me, and I didn't know at that point that she had died, because as far as I was concerned, she was going to come out alive. And then from then on in, I just felt an unbelievable grief, really, and that, you know, how am I still alive and she's not? And, you know, my mother would say I'd be looking for her in the room. I'd be having nightmares and looking for her in the room and shouting to my mother, I can't breathe, I can't breathe.
How difficult was it to grow up in Aberfan after that?
We felt guilty, really, because, well, I was still alive. My sister had obviously died, and you'd go out in the street and you'd be afraid to be out there playing and laughing and joking, because there was a silence in the street. This whole generation of children from 8 to 11 that just didn't exist in Aberfan for many, many years. Massive gap in our street at the time.
And in the whole village?
Well, in the whole village, yeah, because just like my story, really, 5 in my street of 24 houses. There were lots of other streets where five or six children died out of 24, 25 houses.
In a way, it's the end of your childhood.
I actually grew up overnight because I just felt that I needed to be there for the younger brothers and sisters because I could see my parents, my mother in particular, crumbling, you know. For a long time after, she put Annette's place setting out on the table, really knowing full well that Annette was never coming back, but she just put it out there. It was almost like a source of comfort to her, really.
Do you think about Annette now, what she'd have been like?
It's her birthday now coming up and she'll be 60. So everybody's thinking now, what would she be like? What would she be doing? Would she be married? What would her job have been? Would she have children of her own? I think those days, well, it doesn't take the 50th anniversary, really. We've had 50 years of this, really. Every time there's a family occasion, every time it's been a sort of landmark birthday for her, you just think, well, what would her life be like now?
Denise Morgan there, remembering her little sister Annette, who died at Pantglas School that day. I'll be back a little later in the programme, but now over to Alistair in the studio.
Mary, thank you. Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Armed police taser and arrest a 19-year-old after a bomb alert in London. And the awkward dinner party. Trump and Clinton spar at a charity gala. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. A teenager was tasered by counter-terrorism police today after a suspicious device was found on a tube train. The 19-year-old was arrested during an armed operation in North London and is now being held in custody. Yesterday, a controlled explosion was carried out on a device at North Greenwich Station. It is still not clear whether it was a bomb. Our security editor, Rohit Khatru, has the latest.
24 hours after what seemed like an everyday security alert, Scotland Yard officers arrested a 19-year-old man. Counter-terrorism police closing a busy street, firing a taser gun. A white man wearing a hoodie was detained in an operation with an air of absolute urgency.
I saw the aftermath of it. Police takedown over there where 3 or 4 cops converged on a guy, and then 2 police cars came that way, 2 blocked off there, and one with a automatic rifle hopped over the fence and pinned down the guy.
This is where the operation began yesterday, across London in North Greenwich. A suspicious item was found at a tube station. That's common, but rarely are investigators so concerned that they decide to blow it up. Still tonight, they're trying to work out whether it was a viable device or an amateur attempt at one. And the man arrested here in North London is still being questioned on suspicion of the commission, preparation and instigation of terrorism acts.
So, Rohit, in your assessment, how serious an incident is this?
Well, this was a device with wires in, potentially a clock as well, not necessarily a bomb, but investigators now assume that this is not what you would call a hoax. That's why terrorism legislation is being used. And after more than a day of investigating, they still can't say that this was something that we shouldn't be worried about. Arrests under terrorism laws are incredibly common in this country. There is one almost every day. Arrests for the preparation of terrorist acts are rare, and rarer still the discovery of a potential suspected device such as this one.
Right. Rohit, thank you. Hundreds of people have been evacuated from London City Airport after reports of a chemical incident. The ambulance service says it's treating 26 people at the airport and 2 others have been taken to hospital. Emergency services were called just after 4 p.m. The airport is currently closed with all flights suspended. An undercover reporter whose newspaper stings helped jail scores of criminals is tonight behind bars himself. Mazhar Mahmood, known as the fake Sheikh, is starting a 15-month jail sentence for tampering with evidence. And now the former News of the World journalist has been exposed as a crook. Some of his former victims are planning to sue, as Sejal Karia reports.
The secretive reporter with a fearsome reputation for exposing wrongdoing through his controversial sting operations today saw one of his own stings land him behind bars. There were shouts of "Your turn now, Mazza" from the public gallery, as some of those Mazza Mahmood targeted were there to see him sentenced. One of them, the former London's burning actor John Alford, who spent 9 months in jail following one of Mahmood's stings, welcomed the judgment.
Well, he's going to wake up in a prison cell. That's one good thing.
Result. It's taken over 20 years for some of us, but finally a judge and a jury of our peers has woken up to Mazza Mahmood's lies.
For 25 years, Mahmood's stock was high, exposing the secrets of the rich and famous, making for explosive front-page headlines. He targeted sports stars, royals and celebrities. Among them, Emma Morgan, a former Page 3 model who plans to sue Mahmood over a drug sting in the 1990s.
I sold my car last year. Does that make me a car dealer? No. A drug dealer would earn their living from selling drugs. I didn't earn a penny from what I did to Mazza. In fact, I lost thousands, didn't I? I lost fortunes, I lost my career.
But it was Mahmood's drug sting with pop singer Talisa Kontostavlos that did for him. He'd accused her of being a drug dealer, which she always denied. He was convicted of tampering with evidence to make her look guilty. Graham Johnson worked at the News of the World with Mahmood, and he told me why he believes Mahmood got away with what he describes as his bad behaviour.
He had the protection of senior executives at News International, some of whom suspected that he was behaving badly, but didn't do anything about it.
Mahmood's now been sacked by News UK, News International as it was known, who employed him at The Sun on Sunday and the News of the World. And tonight he starts a 15-month spell in jail. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
A former senior police officer has been found guilty of indecently assaulting 2 teenage boys. Gordon Anglesey was a superintendent at North Wales Police in the 1980s. A court heard he abused his position of power to prey on his young and vulnerable victims. A trade deal between the EU and Canada is on the brink of collapse tonight. It follows the refusal of a small region of Belgium to sign up to the plans. It's also raised concerns that similar problems could affect the UK's Brexit negotiations. And new pictures from NASA suggest the Schiaparelli space probe was destroyed on impact as it hit the surface of Mars. The black dot is thought to show the lander. The white dot is thought to be the parachute that failed to operate. Scientists had initially believed the craft landed successfully. The military might of Russia and the Royal Navy faced off today in the English Channel. A flotilla of Russian warships passed the south coast on its way to Syria. They were closely followed by a British destroyer and frigate as tensions between the two countries remain high. Here's our deputy political editor, Sheikh.
A short distance from the cross-channel port and visible from the White Cliffs of Dover, a Russian aircraft carrier entered the English Channel this morning. The Admiral Kuznetsov, Russia's only aircraft carrier, had positioned some MiG fighter jets on the deck. She was following a guided missile destroyer. Yet the Russian Navy was trying to be discreet as it sailed past the Strait of Dover. It wasn't doing a very good job. The convoy set off at the weekend from the Arctic port of Severomorsk. The aircraft carrier can sail with as many as 50 jets, but 2 Royal Navy ships, the destroyer HMS Duncan and the frigate HMS Richmond, are escorting them along the English Channel. The Russian convoy is heading for the waters off the Syrian coast. The city of Aleppo doesn't need more Russian weaponry, but nor does Russia, which has now stationed troops in the city, need to send a naval task force at all. This deployment is all about a show of force.
All of this media attention just serves their objectives of posturing, of showing that they are a potent military force and one to be reckoned with, and making themselves out to be bigger and more capable than they really are.
The European Council meeting in Brussels today also ended with an attack on Russia, and the Prime Minister warned the EU will consider all options if atrocities continue. But in the busy shipping lanes of the English Channel today, Russia was showing the West it can do what it likes. And if it wants to fire missiles into Aleppo from jets based on its aircraft carrier, then it will. Sheikh, ITV News.
2 hostilities now of a different kind and the bitter race for the White House. At last night's pre-election charity dinner in New York, political differences are normally set aside. But this time there were more barbs than banter as Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton traded blows. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
Thank you. The Cardinal of New York was sitting in what he called the iciest spot on the planet, separating Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton at a charity dinner. Trump's early jokes were good. Remember, he has threatened to put Mrs. Clinton in jail, but perhaps he would exercise a presidential pardon.
In fact, just before taking the dais, Hillary accidentally bumped into me, and she very civilly said, "Pardon me."
If Mrs. Clinton enjoyed that, it didn't last. Trump was booed as he started getting personal.
Hillary is so corrupt. She got kicked off the Watergate Commission.
And there were jeers when he spoke of her struggle to win the Catholic vote.
Here she is tonight, in public, pretending not to hate Catholics.
Mrs. Clinton gave as good as she got, referring to her opponent's habits of ranking women out of 10 for their looks.
People look at the Statue of Liberty and they see a proud symbol. Donald looks at the Statue of Liberty and sees a 4. Maybe a 5 if she loses the torch and tablet and changes her hair.
Humour can be helpful in politics, but last night it appeared to highlight, not heal, the rift between these two candidates. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
And that brings our programme to a close on the day the Aberfan tragedy was marked here and right across the country. What happened to this village on that grey October morning 50 years ago will never be forgotten. Generations of local people gathered here in silence to remember the exact moment the school was struck. We'll leave you now with pictures of that tribute on this moving and very emotional day.